Okay, thanks everyone for coming. We're ready to start this NLP seminar. It's an absolute pleasure to have Yoav Artzi with us here today. As you may know, he's just become a real leader in the intersection of NLP and robotics. Everything from large-scale simulated data sets to real quadcopters flying around a robotics lab and being directed in natural language. And I think we're going to hear a variety of the different projects today. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Luke. So I'm really excited to be here. I did a few things around these rooms a few years ago, so it's kind of good to be back. So I'm going to talk about robot control and collaboration, so two different topics, both in situation and instruction following. In very high level, what we want to do is pretty straightforward. We want to model and learn a function that takes instructions and some kind of context and output a sequence of actions. So a pretty easy problem. And the talk will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we'll talk about this problem in mapping instructions to continuous control. And we'll do this with the quadcopter drone. I'll focus on two aspects of the project. The model, where we do a mapping with the interpretable plan generation, and how we do learning to encourage test time exploration of the agent using a simulation. In the second part, I'll talk about collaborative interaction. So I'll introduce Serial Bar, which is a new collaborative environment that we're just releasing with the sequential natural language instructions. I'll talk a bit about modeling, more about learning and how we learn to recover from cascading errors, where you have sequences of instructions, and also, if time allows, on evaluation of sequential instructions, and some existing problem and some proposals that we have to address them. Okay. So the first task is mapping natural language instructions to navigation between landmarks. The agent that we are going to use, it's a quadcopter drone. So it's an Intel Aero drone. It's about this size. It's relatively noisy and makes a lot of wind. And you'll see what this wind does to all the different things in the environment. And the context that we are going to use to do the mapping are the pose estimates of the quadcopter. So these are 6 degrees of freedom pose estimates, and the RGB input that we get from the onboard camera on the drone. So this is how the environment looks like. This is our drone cage. It's roughly 5 by 5 meters. Sorry for the European measurements. I still didn't get the American ones. 10 years around here. So we have a bunch of landmarks around. The environment is randomly instantiated, so every environment is different with random objects. A random instantiation in the real world basically means the grad student goes and puts the things around in specific positions. This is our drone, and this is the first-person view. This is what the drone observes from its camera, and it follows instructions like, after the blue bale, take a right towards the small white bush. Before the white bush, take a right and head towards the right side of the banana. And you'll notice that from its starting point, if you look at its observations, what you see is it doesn't really it doesn't really see all the objects mentioned. So it doesn't see this white bush, which actually more looks like a stone, and it doesn't see this, and it doesn't see the banana. So what the drone has to do, it has to kind of like see these objects as it flies, as it executes the instruction, and actually observe the environment until it finds the goal, and then stop at the right position. So we wanted to follow the trajectory and reach the right position. And this execution is actually a rollout from models. So slightly more formally, the drone state is determined by a configuration, and a configuration is a pair of numbers. So these are target velocities. We have a linear forward velocity and angular yaw rate, so just two real numbers. And every action that our model is going to take, it's going to either update these numbers, so we put two new numbers there, or it's going to take the stop action to indicate task completion and bring the drone into a halt. So our goal is to learn this mapping, where we want to take the function that takes the instruction, the pose estimate, and the first-person RGB input from the camera. And we want to continuously run this model to update the target velocities until we reach to the goal position and take the stop action. And every time we're going to get new observations as this function is operating. So how is this done usually in robotics? So this problem includes a lot of sub-problems, and as computer scientists, the way we think about it is usually, okay, so we're going to have abstract away all the different problems, build all the different modules, and then integrate them together. And this is really difficult. We can have models for perception, language understanding, planning, and control. And we can have it's a lot of engineering effort to build them together. Integrating them is even more complicated, and it requires a lot of knowledge representation work. So for example, we need to represent the meaning of language. We need to think about what kind of symbols or representation we are going to use that is able to interact with all the other models in the system. We are going to take this approach, which is more engineering heavy and kind of like expert knowledge base, and we are going to trade off all this effort with more learning challenges. And we'll take a representation learning approach where we learn a single model that goes all the way from the raw inputs to the actions. So it's going to be a single neural network that is fully differentiable, and we are going to divide this network into two parts. In the first part, we are going to predict states that we are likely to visit during the execution. And this is going to give us something we call visitation distributions. These are distributions over the environment. We're going to treat this distribution as some sort of a plan. And in the second stage, we take this plan and we generate the actions to visit high probability states. So with these visitation distributions, they're going to tell us for a state, what's the probability of visiting that state given a policy and a start state. So once we are starting in a specific place in the environment to execute an instruction, and under a certain policy, what's the probability that we visit each state in the environment during this execution? So what we want to learn to be able to predict the visitation distribution for the oracle policy, because this is the expert policy that tells us how to execute things. If we're able to predict this, now all we have to do is just visit high probability states in the right order in order to complete the task. And I'm not going to discuss this, but in general, these distributions are intractable to compute, especially in continuous action spaces. So you can compute them via an approximation, and depending on the quality of the approximation, you can actually bound the error of the policy you learn. So we are going to compute two of these distributions. The first is a trajectory visitation distribution, and the second is a goal visitation distribution. The trajectory tells us what position we are likely to fly through in the environment as we complete the instruction. And the goal visitation distribution tells us in what position we are likely to take the stop action and indicate that we completed the task. So we can treat this distribution as reflecting what the agent plans to do. And here I'm visualizing the two distributions. This screen actually works better. The red is the trajectory probabilities, and the green are the goal probabilities, so where you're likely to take the stop action. With the goal probabilities, we are also modeling an additional event that is the probability that the goal hasn't been observed yet, so the agent doesn't know where it is. So this is this bar there on the left, on the right, that starts very high because we didn't observe the goal, and goes down as we explore more of the environment. And these distributions, we are constantly going to refine them as we observe more of the environment, and we can visualize them by just kind of like overlaying them over an overhead view of the environment. And this really helps see how these distributions actually form some sort of plan of execution. So here I'm showing the distributions over the overhead view of the cage. I'm also visualizing the agent location, orientation, and what trajectory it has taken so far. And as you can see, as we are observing more of the environment, as the agent moves in the environment, these distributions are continuously refined. So one thing that happens in the beginning is all the mass is on the event that the goal is unobserved. And then slowly more of the mass moves to locations in the environment where the agent thinks the goal is. Okay, I'm not going to describe in detail the model that recover these distributions, and so I'm just to give you a rough idea of how this is done. We take first-person observations, and we use this CNN, a very small ResNet, to extract visual features. And then we have this kind of like a part of the network that does both the mapping and the planning. This part combines deterministic algebraic operations, including a pinhole camera model and projections, with a learned component that treats the generating these distributions as an image generation process. So we are building maps of the environment inside this box, and then we are creating another image. These are the distributions using an architecture that is a language conditioned variant of the unit architecture, for those familiar with. So given these distributions, for the second stage of the network, we have a relatively simple control problem. Because now, if we take these distributions, we transform them and crop around the agent, all we need to do is just kind of like follow the path and do the right action. So it's a very local decision. It doesn't really look at the language. It doesn't look at any of the observation. And all you need to do is, so if you think after you rotate, you basically have the agent facing in this direction. All you have to do is think about how you're going to get the agent to kind of like follow what is the immediate change in the distributions, what's the curve that's going to happen there. And this is done with a simple CNN and some fully connected network. So it's small network. Yes?
Sorry, just a quick question. So when you're estimating the distribution, are those from expert trajectories or from its own trajectory?
So I'll talk about the learning. Okay. So during real time, we estimate these distributions. We don't really have any access to experts during test time, but we are learning them from demonstrations. Okay, so for learning, what we do is we adopt something that's relatively common in robotics in recent years, and we use a simulation to do much of the learning. Usually, the way it's done in robotics is you can think about this problem as I'm going to learn the model on the simulation, where it's relatively easier to learn, and then I have a domain adaptation problem to move it to the real environment. We do something a bit different, and we're going to learn the model jointly in both environments. So our model at the end can just fly in both environments, and we are going to do this using a different kind of training data that we get from the two environments. So for the simulator, what we are going to get is we get demonstrations, and we get an agent, so we can actually roll out and collect experience in the environment. And one of the key learning problems, as you can see, if you compare this first-person RGB input from the simulator to the real world, you see that they're actually different. So we're going to focus on how we can use this environment and the real environment to learn to compensate for the visual discrepancy. For the real environment, all we have are demonstrations. So we don't have the ability for autonomous flight during learning in the real environment, something that carries a lot of cost, and safety consideration is in generally much harder to do. So what we do, we are going to learn in both of these environments, and to do this, I'm going to modify the architecture of the model a bit. So this is our learning architecture. This is our model architecture. What I showed earlier, a bit different. This is our looked a bit different. This is our CNN. This is the features that we get from the CNN. The mapping and planning part of the network, and the control network, and these are the visitation distributions that we are getting. And this is an observability mass that we also accumulate over the execution. So to be able to reason about different visual input, we add an additional CNN here that has the same structure but different set of parameters to handle the different types of visual stimuli that we get from the environment. And one of the main goals of learning is to basically get these features that come from the two different CNNs to be indistinguishable. So the rest of the network doesn't really care if the visual observations are coming from the real world or they're coming from the simulation. Okay? So what we do is we are going to divide this network into two parts. So this is going to be the first stage, and and the control is going to be a second stage. And we will train each of these parts using a different learning algorithm, take advantage of different properties of learning. So we're going to use supervised learning for the first part, where it's really important to have good sample complexity properties, because we don't really have access for a lot of data, especially natural language, which is relatively limited. We will use reinforcement learning for the second part, where it's really important to experience in the environments, and we are going to do this only using the simulation in order to understand the dynamics of the controller. So we can solve this relatively simple but still experience-based problem of controlling the drone. Okay. So for supervised learning, we have two objectives to train the first part of the network. We want to generate the right visitation distributions. This is the plan that goes for the second part. And we want to make sure that the networks behaves the same regardless of if we are getting observations from the real world or from the simulation. So we want these features from the real environment and the simulated environment to be indistinguishable. So for the visitation distributions, it's relatively simple. So we have access to demonstrations. Using demonstrations, we know what state the demonstration is visiting during execution. So we can generate gold standard visitation distribution, and we just have a cross entropy loss to get this to get the right visitation distribution. To get the visual features right, we use an adversarial discriminator. So we have a discriminator that basically takes one of the features, either from the real environment or from the simulated environment, and tries to tell us if these features come from the real environment or the simulated environment. And we're going to adversarially train this discriminator to try to distinguish between them while trying to get the features and the network to basically cheat the discriminator. So this is kind of an adversarial setup. Now, the nice thing about using this kind of discriminator that just judges every time based on like on one set of features is it doesn't really require any aligned data. So the algorithm doesn't really require us to have aligned data into environment. It just takes an image from each one and tries to say simulated or real. Okay, for the RL part, for the control, we're going to use reinforcement learning. We use a relatively straightforward algorithm. So we just use proximal policy optimization. We add another value function and a way to sample velocities from the controller, and we fix where the first stage is fixed. Now the key thing here is what's the reward that we are using here. So our reward, we need to achieve 4 objectives in the reward we'll have to encourage the system, the agent to do. So first of all, we want to follow the plan. So the plan is the visitation distribution. So the second stage gets the visitation distribution. We want to be able to control the drone in order to follow this plan accurately. We want to be able to explore to find the goal if it's not observed. We want to only select feasible actions. So we have this. So the velocities that we need to output are supposed to be within a specific range, and we want to be efficient. We want to take a good, efficient path along the trajectory of the instruction. So we design our reward to basically have a term for each of those to achieve each of these objectives. We have 2 terms that control for following the visitation distributions. They look at the Earth mover distance between what the agent has done so far and the distributions, and kind of like try to minimize that. So this will allow the agent to follow the visitation distribution and stop at the right place. We have an exploration term that basically penalizes for stopping when we didn't observe the goal. So if we stop without observing the goal, we are doing something very wrong, and we want the agent to avoid doing that. And then we have 2 terms, one to penalize for for actions that are outside the controller range, and one to penalize for basically every step that you're taking. So just a verbosity penalty. Okay, so these 2 processes, they run together, and together we call the algorithm supervised and reinforcement asynchronous learning, or SURREAL, where the 2 processes, the reinforcement learning and the supervised process, they run at the same time, and they constantly exchange information between them. So the supervised learning process periodically sends updates to the parameters of the first stage that are used to roll out trajectories in the reinforcement learning process. And the reinforcement learning algorithm that constantly samples trajectories is going to send these trajectories back into the supervised learning, and so these trajectories are used as kind of like the ground truth of observations that you're going to try to predict the visitation distributions from. So what does this give us? What happens is, in the first stage, we learn to predict visitation distributions based on what is basically noisy executions on the observations we get from them. So even if our execution is not perfect, we'll still try to predict the correct visitation distribution from that. The second stage learns to predict controller actions given noisy visitation distribution. So the visitation distribution can be, for example, discontinuous or have all kind of like changes in how the probabilities are distributed across the board. So, and we really want the controller to be able to recover from this kind of errors and still predict the correct actions. Okay, so for experiments, we use an Intel Aerodrone. We use the Vicon motion captures for pose estimates. So this gives us a pretty good solution about the pose of the drone. And we use it for simulation. We use Microsoft AirSim, this really nice package that basically has a drone flying in an environment. Our drone cage is almost 5 meters by 5 meters. We created both in reality and in simulation. We have 15 possible landmarks and between 5 and 8 in each instantiation of the environment. We also have access to data from a larger environment that we used for previous work that is simulation only and includes more landmarks and a larger set of landmarks to sample from. So for data for the real environment, we have 100 paragraphs of instructions. So these are larger instructions that capture a relatively large trajectory across the entire case, and they're segmented to 402 like single instructions. So this is the entire data that we have in the real environment. We have demonstrations for these instructions. We evaluate with 20 of these paragraphs, which gives us about 70 examples for evaluation. And what we do for the evaluation, we actually concatenate these consecutive segments because we want to create more complex trajectories. So when you concatenate these trajectories, you have a trajectory that are more interesting and have more curves in them, and you also have much more of an observability problem because this usually includes turning around different objects and facing in different directions. The Oracle trajectories are generated using a very simple caret planner that sees the goal trajectories and just creates the actions. And we also have much more data in the simulator, including for the larger environment. Okay, so we focus on human evaluation. I'm not going to show our automated evaluation. What we do, but we also have that in the paper, and if someone asks, I can pull up the slide. Usually we find the automated evaluation actually flawed because they don't really maintain the semantics of the instruction. So what we do is we just ask human to look at the trajectories the drone takes and ask them to rank on a 5-point Likert scale. If the drone is reaching the goal right, and if it's taking the complete path, including the goal right. Okay, so these are the results. So this is I think it's called the Gantt chart, if I'm pronouncing it right. It's the best way we found to kind of like present the Likert score. We also have the averages here, but these are usually a bit misleading. And I'm comparing here to 4 other systems. This is our approach. This is an Oracle, and this is a non-learning baseline. So average basically means that we are going to take the average velocities for the average amount of time. So just the most simplest baseline. These are two baselines. The PVN one uses our model, but without the features that allow for exploration and model goal observability. We train it with behavior cloning. It gets much better than the average baseline, not surprisingly. When we take our model and we add the modeling, the goal observability and the exploration, but we train it with behavior cloning, we actually don't see any improvement. And if you really look at the Gantt charts, you actually see that we have more ones there. So especially for the path over the previous model. So with just behavior cloning, all the extra actually make the model worse. When we combine all the extra features and Surreal, we see a significant improvement. And the other thing about this visualization is you can see that we actually receive 40% of the time, which is a kind of a nice performance. And we almost have a 25% improvement over the PVN2 behavior cloning baseline, just from adding the learning algorithm. Okay, so I'm going to show some examples, and then we'll switch to the second part. So I'm going to start with the cool example. So this is my cherry. And then I'm going to move to a failure example, which is slightly kind of like even more interesting. So this is actually really interesting as well. So here, the instruction is, once near the rear of the gorilla, turn right and head towards the rock, stopping once near it. So this is the gorilla. This is its butt, basically. And the drone is facing there. What the instruction wants, it wants the drone to fly to here. So the instruction is actually wrong, because turning right is exactly the wrong thing to do here. You're supposed to turn left. So what the drone is going to do, you can see it's starting here. It doesn't really know what's going on. A lot of the goal distribution is almost completely at the goal is not observed. So what it's going to do, it's actually going to, it's going to follow the path. So it's turning right, but then it doesn't see the goal. So it's going to do this kind of like lasso movement until it observes the goal and flies to the right place. So it actually corrects for the wrong instruction while still executing the mistake. This is a failure, and we're going to see two failures here. So first, the visitation predictions are very wrong in this example. And second, there is a control failure. So when the drone will start flying, it will start doing weird stuff, but it's going to correct for that. So what we're supposed to do here, head towards the area just to the left of the mushroom and then loop around it. So we want to go here. This is a small mushroom. I think foraging is really popular in Seattle now, right? So we want to fly to here, but you can already see, there is no real observability issue here, but you can already see that the drone is making the wrong, is planning it wrong. It thinks I observed the goal, it's really confident, it puts all the mass on the wrong side of the mushroom. So it's going to follow the plan, it's going to start doing that, and then it's going to make a control mistake, and it's going to deviate. So this is the control error. But for that, it's actually going to correct, and it's going to kind of like fly back to the path and still go to the wrong goal. So we still get a failure here at the end, despite the noble attempts at fixing things. Yes?
Is there a perspective you instruction givers to adhere to when they were generating the instruction?
Yeah, so we basically have them, we randomly generate a very long path, and kind of like, and we generate this path to go around landmarks in the environment, and then we ask them to write instructions to it. Then we have another worker that navigates in the environment. We do it using a much simpler agent because these are complicated to control. It's a simulated environment, and they kind of like, they have this discrete agent. They follow the instructions, and they segment it at the same time. So they validate, they give us a path, and it's all segmented.
They're following from the drone's perspective?
They are told to, the instructions writers are told to write from the drone perspective, but they have like a gut view of the environment. Okay, so before we switch to the second part, I'm happy to take any questions if there are. Yeah.
I'm curious about balancing the components of the reward function for reinforcement learning.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any tricks or?
There are coefficients, and there are hyperparameters. So there's no trick. There is just a search space. But yeah, but you have to get the magnitude of these things right, and you have to get the verbosity penalty at the right amount. We didn't really optimize these things. We don't have the computation, or more important, the willpower to do that. So it's probably very suboptimal at this point. Okay, so the second part, I'm going to switch gears. I want to talk about collaboration. So the first thing I want to do is I want to introduce Serial Bar. So Serial Bar is a situated, collaborative game with sequential instruction following. So this is the Serial Bar environment, the complete board. And these are randomly generated environments. So every game gets a different environment. There are passable terrains, like these patches of grass and the roads. There are impassable terrains, like the mountains and and the lakes. And there are all these landmarks that we can't pass through, like houses, lampposts, trees. And in this environment, we have a bunch of cards spread around the environment. So you can see here we have, I mean, the colors are a bit off on this screen. I think you didn't change this since I graduated. This is like an orange free square. I think it's orange. This is a red, 3 red bars, 3 yellow squares. So each of these cards has like a bunch of shapes, a number of elements, and a color, right? In this environment, we have 2 players. So we have a a leader and a follower. This is our follower here. It's facing this direction. And this is our leader. It faces here. And these two are moving around the environment. And what they try to do is they try to play the game set. I don't know anyone familiar with the game set. I wasn't when I started doing this. But basically what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to collect sets of cards. Now, sets is a card game. We are putting it in spatial environments. But we are bending the rules a bit, so it's not exactly set. But what we need to do is we need to collect sets of free cards. And the cards have to have a unique color, shape, and count. And every time you collect a set of cards, you get a point. So you want to collect more and more sets of cards. OK? So let's play set. So here's a set of cards. Is this a good set of cards or a bad set of cards? Valid or invalid? Valid, right? We have two. Each count appear once. Each color appears once, and each shape appears once. So this is great. That set is invalid, right? Why? Yeah, we have two frees here. So this is a bad set. OK. So in this environment, with all the cards spread around, the two agents, what they do is they take turns, and they have limited steps per each turn. And they move around the board, and they select cards. So when one of the players steps on a card, it's going to change its selection status. So you can select, you can move back, and you can deselect, for example. And when the set of selected cards is valid, they're going to disappear. New random cards will appear in the environment. And the players get a point, and they get more turns. So they get to play longer. OK? OK, so this is an example. See, the leader is going to collect this card. The follower is going to turn around and going to collect this card. The leader is then going to go and take the two stars there, and the set disappears. They just got a point. OK? So in this environment, the two players, they are collaborating. They select sets together. So everything is happening in collaboration here. They have to be coordinated. And the leader is going to instruct the follower using natural language. So the leader tells the follower what to do, hence the names, leader and follower. The follower can execute multiple instructions per turn, or one instruction across multiple turns, as much as like steps is required to execute the instruction. And we incentivize collaboration. So we make it really, really critical for them to collaborate. So you could think that the follower has a lot of steps. They can just go like, I'm going to collect whatever cards I want. I don't need the leader. But actually, the follower only sees what's ahead of them. So they can't really plan. They have this like very limited view of the environment. And the environment changes. So cards appear and disappear all the time. Where the leader has this like full view of the environment that we just saw. So the leader sees the entire environment. The follower has more steps. So the follower is like this kind of like dumb but capable. And our actual model is actually pretty dumb, as you will see, but capable. So the follower can go much farther at each turn, where the leader actually has very limited amount of steps. So this is how this is kind of views they see. This is the same example we saw earlier. They're going to collect the same sets. This is the first-person view of the follower. And this is like a part of the board that the leader sees. The leader gives the instruction, grab the three red stripes behind you. This is exactly what we saw happening earlier. So the leader gave the instruction. It's going to collect one. You can actually see the leader a bit moving in the follower view. The follower goes and collects. The leader will collect the card. And the card disappears, and they just got a point. OK. So the serial bar scenario has three properties that we emphasized. First, it's spatial reasoning. So this entire thing is not just a card game. It's happening in a 3D spatial environment. So there is a lot of stuff to refer to. The language that you get is very like spatially aware. There's a lot of like relations, references to objects. It's also collaborative. Working together is really critical for success. So if you want to get more turns, if you want to get more points, you need to actually work with the follower, and you need to do it effectively. If the follower just goes on their own, they're going to sabotage the leader plan. So they are also incentivized to collaboration. And of course, we are going to pay more for people that score more in the game, like much, much more. So they really want to do it. There is sequential instructions here that include all these, everything that you see in sequential instructions. There are dependencies, there is planning, there is a changing of goals and sub-goals, and there is user interaction. So the user is in the system. It doesn't just give a sequence of instructions and goes away, which means that they can adapt, they can and they can modify their strategy as they go. So let's look at a more interesting example. So this is an example from our human game. So we have two different humans playing the different roles and playing together. And what's going to happen here is the leader is going to give, the leader is here, and it's going to give a bunch of several instructions to the follower that is here. It's first going to plan to collect, for the follower to collect this card, the leader will collect this card, and then the leader will collect this card. So it's going to get these 3 cards, if I remember correctly. The follower is going to make a mistake, but then it's going to correct itself, so it will go in not the most efficient route. And then the leader is going to do something. It's going to see that the follower has extra moves, but it still has to complete this set. So it's going to plan ahead, and it's going to try to position the follower in a place that is like just close to the next card to collect, but not really, don't collect the card yet because we are working on a different set. So this is the instruction. Tell F, the follower is going a bit convoluted to here. The leader gets a card. The follower is here, but it tells the agent, get to here, but don't get it yet. Now it's going to tell it, get a card, and now go to here. So go very far while I collect the cards, and now get this card. And after you collect these cards, go and position yourself for the next card. So we have this process of planning, and the leader constantly kind of like a good leader, and we have some really good players doing this game, much better than me. They actually plan ahead and think about how they are going to use the turns of the follower really, really effectively. So that's a trick to make it work. Any questions about the game? Just curious. It's kind of like a complicated setup with all the considerations. Yes?
Do you have different rules for people who are good at being leader and good at being follower?
No, we actually use the same pool, but we have we have this tutorial that's a qualifier, and then we have 2 pools. We have the novices and we have the experts, and because we don't want to frustrate the experts with all these juniors. So then when someone matures enough, we move them to the expert pool, and these are like the heavy players. They're really, really good. And we have about 260 players. So it's kind of like it's a nice pool of players that are playing this game. And they are really good, and they really like it. So I mean, I guess they also get paid. So okay, so what's the task here? So the task is just like before. We want to take the leader instructions and we want to map it to follower actions. So the function now takes an instruction, the observations. We are taking structural observations, so we are not doing vision here, and whatever happens in the environment with the leader, and we want to output the actions. And these are discrete actions. So move forward, turn left, turn right. So not as complicated action spaces before. We're going to do today, I'm doing 2 simplifying assumptions. So I'm going to completely ignore in our model the interaction history, which caps degree, just to simplify the modeling. And we are going to have full observability. And this is something we are currently working on fixing. Okay, so in this setup, in this collaborative setup, the instruction following is kind of like becomes a bit different than the simple sequential instruction following in other data sets like SCON or ATIS. So the user actions are interleaved in system actions and likely depend on it. So you actually see that the follower executing an instruction, they run out of steps, the leader starts doing stuff, and then the follower continues the instruction. So everything keeps moving all the time, and we have this element inside the execution of the follower that changes the environment. So the environment basically changes under the feet of the follower. And with errors, not everything is lost because the leader is there. They can change their language, they can change their plan, they can delegate actions differently depending on how good their follower is. So they can continuously adapt to kind of play the best way possible with the follower. Okay, So I'm going to briefly describe the model. It's actually based on the model that we saw earlier with the visitation predictions. And I'll discuss here how how we learn to recover from cascaded errors between instructions. So when you fail to execute instructions, how do you recover so you can at least try to do the next one properly? And I'll talk a bit about evaluation. Okay, so our model is based on the visitation prediction network. We have two extensions to kind of support more complex instructions. So we add more distributions to the planning part. So we now predict 4 distributions instead of 2 in order to kind of like reason about obstacles and multiple goals. And we add a recurrent action generation to the model so we can do like more complex trajectories. So the execution is actually more stateful. So this is our model. This is the plan generation part. So we are generating these distributions over the environment. And we have 4 distributions this time, in contrast to 2 earlier. We have goals. So now we have multiple goals because we can pick multiple cards while you are navigating in instruction. We have the locations to pass through, this kind of like where to go through as you move around the environment. We have locations to avoid. So it's actually really important not to touch other cards as you potentially go around there and move in the environment. Because if you touch them, you will have to deselect them because you're probably screwing up the current set that you're trying to build. And we have we predict impassable locations to know how to kind of like move around them. So these are like the mountains, the lakes, and the different landmarks that you can't just go through. For action generation, we take these visitation distributions, and just like before, we are going to rotate them and crop them around the agent. This time, instead of just predicting the action each time independently, we use the decoder to have a state and predict the actions by using some kind of an RNN over the actions. Okay, for our training data, we recorded human-human games. So we had 2 humans, one the leader, one the follower, playing against each other, playing with each other. And because of how the game is structured, each instruction is aligned with the sequence of actions exactly. And it's really easy from that to just generate visitation distributions, just like we had with the demonstration in the case of the drone. So we're going to initialize each stage separately with supervised learning, and then we're going to train them both together. And when we train them both together, we're going to try to learn to recover from errors. Okay? So the first part of the learning basically works like this. So we have 2 objectives, one for the visitation distribution. So these are predicted and the labels. So we use a cross entropy term there. We have another object. We use the predicted distributions in order to do a teacher forcing to predict the actions. So just like decoding out a sequence. We don't allow gradients to flow from the action generation into the first stage because we want to make sure that this remains interpretable and representing what we want. Now, the key challenge here is that we want to learn to recover from errors, but the data actually doesn't contain this information because in data, humans are playing. They're playing pretty well. They don't have errors, and even when they have small errors, they're very different than what the system is likely to make. So there is no signal in this kind of like supervised learning in order to learn to recover from errors. So what we do is our approach basically has 2 parts. We augment the data with the examples that we generate automatically that show recovery behavior. And then we are going to train our model to implicitly reason differently when it recovers from errors rather than it's when execute instructions well. So there are 2 cases of possible errors. So when we execute an instruction and we get to the final state of the instruction, that state might be not the correct state, and it can be different from the correct state either by the cards selected are different, or the agent, the follower, is ending at the wrong position. So we're not going to handle this type of error. It's a bit more complicated and requires rethinking parts of the model. But what we're going to do is we're going to generate examples that are going to allow the agent to recover from this error where it's not in the right position. So how does this look like? So these are two instructions, consecutive instructions in our data. Here is the follower. The leader is there. The instruction is turn right and go down the road to the intersection with the trees, and then pass the yellow house on its left and grab the 3 blue triangles. So the correct execution is like the agent goes down the road, gets to the intersection here, it sees the yellow house there, and then it's going to go on its left and grab these cards there. So this gives us in our data 2 examples, one for the first instruction and one for the second instruction. So what's an arrow may look like? In inference time, you might do something like this. So instead of going on the road, you will kind of like scramble a bit, go here, and then, OK, I need an intersection with some trees. I'm going to stop here. But now we are in the wrong position for the next instruction. So we want to be able to recover from this. So what we do is we generate an example where you start from this final position that we observed. We do it during learning. We roll out. We see what position you are in, and we generate an example from that. So that's great. That's not going to work well. Why is this not going to work well? If we just treat this as an example, because it's a very noisy example. Look what's going on here. We are now standing here, and we are asked to go on the left of the yellow house. There are 2 yellow houses here, so things are a bit confusing. Arguably, this one is more salient to the agent. That's the one it presents. And we actually ask it to go on the right side of the house. So it's a bit. So now we introduced an example that actually doesn't align with the language, and it can hurt our ability to learn concepts like left and right, which are really important. So what we need to do is we need to be able to reason differently about this instruction. We need to tease apart reasoning about proper instructions where we're in the right state from reasoning about instructions that are misaligned with the environment and where we're recovering from errors. And to do this, we add a classifier and a classifier objective to the network. So we have this a neural network part that does this, that generates these plans. We're going to look at all its activations in all the layers that happen here. And we are using these activations, we are going to try to classify if this is a recovery example or if it's not a recovery example. And we're going to maximize this. What is this going to give us? If we are able to successfully distinguish between these things, we know that the activations here, that this part of the network is reasoning differently about these examples. So now we have implicit reasoning that allows us to kind of like reason differently about these things. Okay? And the way this learning is going to run, we are going to update the model. We're going to alternate between updating the model parameters and collecting new examples for error recovery. So we're going to alternate between these two and kind of like keep learning and constantly add new examples that show like weird errors of how the system is behaving. Okay, so for data collection, we use multiplayer games with human-human games. We use Amazon Mechanical Turk. We manage this like really cool ecosystem for crowdsourcing, and we give them a base payment plus bonus for each point. So actually, if you're pretty bad, you don't get paid a lot, but if you're really, really good, you can get paid quite a bit in this game. We collected 1,200 of these games that are successful with 264 workers. We split it into train, dev, and test. We have a relatively large vocabulary. I was actually surprised when I saw this number. This is a lowercase, but it's not stemmed. But still, it's like 3,600 tokens for an environment that is actually relatively simple and constrained. The games are relatively long. There are 16 minutes on average, and on average, they have 20 instructions. We also collected an additional 200 games for testing, where we basically don't tell people if they're playing against an agent or with an agent or with a human. We're telling them you're going to do either one and just kind of like ask them to do their best. So for evaluation, how am I in time? OK. For evaluation, so there are 2 ways to evaluate sequential instruction following in general. You can either evaluate single instructions, so you run on each instruction starting from the gold start state, or you can do complete interactions, where you start at the beginning of the interaction and you just let your agent roll out and see what's going on. This first one doesn't measure error propagation, which is the major thing in sequential instruction following, while the second one is very good at error propagation, maybe a bit too aggressive, because if you fail early, all the other instructions are going to be invalid. So think about it like this. If we have a sequence of instructions, I managed to execute 1 and 2 correctly. I made an error on the third one. So evaluating 4 and 5 is likely to be nonsensical because I'm in the wrong position. Something bad happened. So I actually don't really use this data. So we don't really measure the effect of error propagation on 4 and 5. And if our model is relatively is not that good, we are leaving aside most of the data. So we're actually not really testing on most of the data that is available to us. So what we propose instead is to do something we call cascaded evaluation, where you generate additional examples. So for each interaction, you generate examples starting at each instruction in the interaction. So we'll have an example starting at 2, an example starting at 3, 4, and 5. So now we are giving each instruction a chance when it's here in the beginning, but we are also measuring the effect of error propagation from this instruction. So using this metric, we measure 2 things. So we measure the proportion of instruction followed. So given how many instructions we have left, what's the proportion of them that we followed successfully? And given how many points were scored in the recorded game, starting from that point where we start, when the example starts, what's the proportion of scores we achieved? Okay? Okay, so we compute all these metrics on the recorded interactions. We also evaluate with live users, where we measure how many points we can get. And these users play against each other humans, or the agent. Okay, so these are results on the held out game. We evaluate against a sequence-to-sequence attention model. This is very similar to some of the models we applied to room and SAIL. It's kind of standard in instruction following. It performs pretty bad. Our models, the blue one, performs significantly better. So all the planning and structure really helps. But there is still a large gap from the static oracle. I've been told it's not pronounced enough, so maybe I should make this a logarithmic scale or something. But yeah, so there is a large gap, and you can ask yourself, okay, so is it even useful? Can anyone do something with an agent that is like so far from the oracle? But the answer to that is yes, and the key here is that this is an interactive collaboration. So there's actually a lot of freedom for the leader in order to change their language, adapt, decide what kind of task they delegate. So when we have people play with the agent, yes, the agent doesn't perform as well as with humans, but it performs pretty well. And we get to like, the mean point is 50% than what you get with a human, which for us was kind of surprising. And the best players that actually adapt and understand what the network is learning and what it's not good at, they can even get to 14 points. Yeah.
To see quality.
And we didn't try that. So it's a problem because these experiments, it's like they cost a lot of money. So you kind of like limited how much you can try, but it's a good point. Okay, so let's do that. Pray for me. Okay, wait, where am I? Wait. Let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to play the game a bit, and we'll see. So the problem is, and I warn you in advance, it's a neural network, so it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. So just, it's kind of always terrifying. Find your partner, ready to start game. Let's maximize. Okay, so here I am, and here is the follower. I'm going to start by collecting this card. I'll actually go myself to collect that. And I'll have the follower go grab this one and this one. Okay? So I can find my mouse. I'll write an instruction. So I want to turn right and go past the windmill to pick the 2 blue, two blue hearts. Okay, I'm gonna. This is pretty short, so it's likely to have some steps left. So I'm also gonna push it to the next one. Hopefully, it doesn't mess things up, because otherwise I'm stuck. So I can say, what do you say? Like turn a bit to the left, turn a bit left, and pick the 3 yellow squares. Okay, great. So now I'm going to move myself. So I'm going to go like this. Okay, I'm out of step. See, I can't do a lot. And I'm going to move. Done. Okay. 1. Okay, one done. You see, it's actually finished the instruction. It marks it done. It doesn't have access to the next one. So it does. So even they only. So that's how we get the alignment. We make sure that they only see the current instruction and the previous ones, and only when they say they're done, they get the next one. Okay, I'm going to turn. Oh, okay, done. Okay, it's going to collect this. Okay, now I can go here. 1 point. Okay, so let's see. So next, so I'm going to, so let's see. Okay, so I can't really see this card. So we have this cool feature where we can do this. So this is a pink triangle. I'm going to get these 3 bars, and I'm going to get my follower to get these 2. So these 3 are going to be a set. So let's go back to a normal view, and I'm going to tell it like pass the tiny bush and grab the 2 black rings. Okay, let's see how that works. And okay, I don't have any steps left, so I'm done. So it's going to go. Okay, and I'm going now to turn around. Okay, I'm done. So I'm done. He's kind of like not doing anything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to plan ahead. This is a bit trickier. So there is something really nice. There's like a cluster here, so I can have the follower just kind of like go a home run on these 3 cards. So this is what I'm going to do because they're very close and they form a set. But I don't want it to happen before I finish this set because otherwise things are going to be invalid. So I am going to go right towards the 3 green stars, but don't step on it. Okay, and I'm done. Oh no, no, no. Ooh. Okay, I'm doing this. I'm doing this. Okay, and now let's go. Let's grab these. Okay, so grab the 3 green stars, and then I wanted to head left a bit, head left, and get the pink triangle. After you get the pink triangle, I go right to grab the 2 yellow. What is it? Pluses. Okay, to grab the 2 yellow plus. Okay, done. 1. And okay, almost done. I can move whatever. I'm not going to continue for another set because. Please. Ah. Oh right. Grab the yellow plus. Oof. Yes. Okay. So this is a serial bar. Okay. So let's summarize. So I have we talked about continuous control and casting planning is visitation distribution prediction and joint simile learning with Surreal. We had Serial Bar, which is a scenario platform to study collaborative natural language instruction. We talked about generating recovery examples and implicit reasoning about these examples. And we talked about cascaded evaluation. All this stuff is available online, and you can even go and try and see where it fails. You can put a bug or something when it fails or something. I don't know if we'll be able to fix it. The first part was done with Waltz, who is co-advised between me and Ross Nepper. And the second part was the project. It's a giant project with Elaine leading it, and a lot of the early game development was done by Claudia. You can go to like a /demo and give it a try. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm happy to take questions. There's more time.
A little bit over time, so no problem if you have to slide out, but let's go ahead and do 5 minutes of questions or something to those that can stay. Do you have any questions?
For the serial bar one, do you think you can procedurally generate trajectories in like synthetic language? And do you think that would help with evaluation on real language?
Good question. I don't know. We actually have like a. So one of the things we did at some point is we built a way to generate a synthetic language and a simulator that actually does the 2 players and stuff. We didn't end up using it. So I'm not. So I just don't know. But it's a. I suspect you could do something of like, to initialize things, understand the environment a bit more, the dynamics. Yeah.
How do you adapt the hexagonal grid of the game to the rectangular grids of the neural network?
Oh, wow. I don't remember. It took us like a while to figure that out. There is some kind of a mapping. We found some blog posts. That's how research works now. I don't know, but there is like a deterministic procedure that just maps it in a way that also allows like the CNNs to have the right kind of like view, so they can convolve properly. Okay.
What's gonna make big progress in Serial Bar? Like, what are the functionalities that you need?
So I think, let's see. So more data definitely will help here. It's not that much data. Our model is deficient in two ways. So one thing is that we don't have access to the interaction history. So we just can't reason about that, and that hurts us. Another thing is that because we actually cheated a bit and allowed full observability, this is actually, I suspect it's hurting us during learning, because it doesn't force the model to kind of like learn to generalize properly about spatial relations. So we are moving now to a partially observable. There is like a lot of engineering involved, so that's the only reason why it wasn't there in the first place. So I suspect this hurts us. There are some crazy trajectories that are harder to, so if you have a trajectory that goes like this and forks and goes like this or something like that, the visitation distributions don't have a temporal aspect, so they're actually not really good at capturing that. Yeah, and people do this kind of stuff, like go there, then step back, then go there, and yeah. All right. Yeah.
So how did you process language instruction?
Very dumb. We just use an RNN for the language. So this is another thing. So we basically, the language that goes into both of these projects is like, we take an RNN, we take a single vector, very old fashioned, and we just create all kinds of like filters from it to process the visual input. But the problem is with relatively short instructions and simpler ones, it's probably okay. But the minute you have a lot of stuff happening, like do this and do that and do that and do that, it's completely broken. So something you will notice is like the humans that play well with the agent, what they do is they shorten their sentences significantly, because long sentences don't work well. It just can't capture the this like ordering of different things. So that's there's kind of like an interesting modeling problem that we are really not sure how to solve. We've been thinking about it for a while in how to integrate a more sequential reading of the instruction into Lingonet. That's the model that does the planning. Yeah.
Did you collect any statistics on how players adapt over time of playing the game?
We tried that. The problem is that the sample was too small, so we got like really weird graphs, and they are completely unreliable. I had this when it happened, let's get the players that play the most and play well and see how fast they adapt. But then you get the graph that looks like this, because you have like 3-4 samples, so it wasn't really helpful. But there's definitely people adopted like different strategies to play well with the agent, and we have some statistics and comments in the paper about exactly what's going on there. They dumped down the expectations. When they first met the agent, the response wasn't welcoming. Someone says, just pick the card and drop dead, and stuff like that. So they weren't happy. Yeah.
So you adapt the agent as they're playing?
No, so it's fixed learning. It's like we just learn, we have a model, and we throw it at humanity, and we pray.
Last question.
Did you tell them they were playing with an agent?
We told them they're going to get to play either with an agent or with a human, but we really want to, when we told them you can do not ask if this is a human. Do not do if you're a human, turn left. If you're a robot, turn right. Don't do that. So they didn't do it. They're actually a really good pool of workers, and but. Given their comments, their feedback, it was pretty clear they understood very fast if they are working with an agent or a human. So the thing is, even if the human is suboptimal and make mistakes, when the agent makes mistakes, it's it's out of control. It's ridiculous, and it's so something it's not really good at is it's not really good at counting steps. So just go 2 steps or turn right twice. It would just run to the other side of the board and try to jump. So it's really clear what you're working against, and the graceful failure is not the strong suit of our agents.